She rolled up to him in that wheelchair, small as a whisper, but with eyes that carried the weight of years no child should bear, said she needed help, and she'd run from the only home she knew. What came next was a fight for her safety, her voice, and a chance to show the whole town what real courage looks like. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you're watching from. Wind whistling through lighthouse windows, the steady rhythm of waves. Eleanor Thorne was 71 that November, with hands like knotted driftwood and eyes the color of storm clouds. Every evening at sunset, she'd climb them 112 steps to light the beacon. Manual operation. Mind you, none of that newfangled automation for Eleanor. Machines don't have souls, she'd tell anyone who'd listen. And souls is what keeps ships from the rocks. Now, most lighthouse keepers had families, children running underfoot, wives hung in laundry and salt air. Not Eleanor. She lived alone. In that tower, had for 4 decades. The townspeople of Millhaven whispered, as townspeople do. Some said she was odd. Others said she was broken. Footsteps on wooden stairs, slow and deliberate, but broken things, child, sometimes hold together better than new ones. Eleanor knew every ship that passed her waters. Could tell a fishing vessel from a cargo hauler by the sound of its engine 3 miles out. She kept records, 2 meticulous logs in her spidery handwriting. Bait, time, vessel type, weather conditions. What the town didn't know was why she kept such detailed records. What she was really watching. 4. A ship's horn echoing across the water. The answer lay in a wooden chest beneath her bed. 43 years of newspaper clippings, photographs, and letters tied with faded ribbon. All documenting the same thing. Ships that never made it home. Eleanor wasn't just a lighthouse keeper. She was a keeper of the lost. Asterisk November 15th, 1987. 3 men in government suits came knocking. Coast Guard Inspector Frank Morrison, Town Selectman Roger Phillips, and some lawyer whose name Eleanor forgot as soon as he said it. Mrs. Thorne, Morrison began, shifting uncomfortably in Eleanor's tiny kitchen. Technologicals have made manual lighthouse operations obsolete. We're installing an automate system. You'll receive a generous pension, of course. Eleanor poured coffee into chipped mugs, her movements deliberate as prayer. And what happens to the records, ma'am? My logs? 43 years of ship movements, weather patterns, rescue coordinates. Morrison exchanged glances with Phillips. That's just record keeping, Mrs. Thorne. The Coast Guard has computerized systems now. The clink of spoon against ceramic. Eleanor set down her coffee and walked to the window. The November sea churned gray-green, whitecaps like scattered prayers. You ever hear of the Miranda's Dream, Inspector Morrison? Can't say I have. October 12th, 1962. Fishing vessel out of Portland. 4 souls aboard. Eleanor's voice carrieth weight of decades. Storm came up sudden-like. Last anyone saw of her was my light guiding her toward the channel. She turned, and something in her storm-gray eyes made Morrison step back. Ship never made port. No wreckage found. No distress calls. Just gone. Eleanor's fingers strummed against the windowsill. But I saw her, Inspector. Saw her make it past the rocks. Saw her reach safe water. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Thorne, with respect, that was 25 years ago. Memory can be. My memory sharp as broken glass. Eleanor interrupted. And I got proof. Asterisk. Eleanor led them upstairs, past the circular stairwell that climbed to the beacon room. Her bedroom was sparse iron bed, simple dresser, and that wooden chest she'd kept locked for 4 decades. You want to know what I've been recording all these years? Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she worked the old brass lock. I've been documenting a graveyard, gentlemen. Ships Thatchell sunk, but didn't. Men who should have died, but lived. The chest opened with a sigh, releasing the scent of old paper and secrets kept too long. Rustling papers, photographs sliding across wood newspaper clippings covered the bed like fallen leaves. Headlines screamed of Meridimadisters, freighter, lost in storm, fishing vessel missing, Coast Guard suspends search. But beside each clipping lay something else: ship manifests, crew rosters, and Eleanor's medicalist notes. Miranda's dream, Eleanor read from a yellowed page. 4 crew. John Patterson, age 34, married, 2 children. Miguel Santos, age 28, expectant father. Thomas Reed, age 45, veteran. Captain William Billy Morrison, age 52. Inspector Morrison's face went pale. Morrison? Your uncle, if I'm guessing right. You got his eyes. Eleanor's voice softened. Billy Morrison didn't die in that storm, Inspector. None of them did. The room fell silent, except for the eternal sound of waves against stone. According to maritime records, the Miranda's dream was lost with all hands. Insurance paid out, families grieved. But I saw that boat make it to deep water, and 3 days later I saw foremen board a cargo ship bound for South America. Paper. Rustling as more documents emerge. Insurance fraud, Inspector. Staged disasters. Ships that sank, but were really sold to foreign buyers. Crews that died, but were paid to disappear and start new lives. And every single one of them passed my lighthouse on their way to freedom. Morrison's hands shook as he picked up a photograph. 4 men on a dock, very much alive, one of them, unmistakably bearing the family resemblance. 43 years I've been keeping their secrets, Eleanor continued. 43 years off watching families mourn men who are drinking rum on some Caribbean beach, but I never said nothing. You know. Why? The 3 men stared at her, speechless. Because sometimes mercy matters more than justice. Asterisk. Inspector Morrison sank into Eleanor's rocking chair like a man who'd just seen his whole world shift on its axis. The photograph of his uncle trembled in his hands. My father died believing his brother was a hero, Morrison whispered. Uncle. Billy was supposed to be sending money home. Mom waited 20 years for his insurance money to clear probate. Eleanor's weathered hands sorted through more papers. Your uncle was sending money home, child. Just not through official channels. Check with the Cayman Islands trust account number, 7,743. Been depositing money there every month since 1962. The scratch of pen on paper sheet. Wrote the information on a scrap of paper and handed it to Morrison. Your mother's been receiving anonymous payments for her medical bills, hasn't she? Checks from some charity foundation she never heard of? Morrison's eyes widened. The Maritime Relief Fund. She gets a check every month. Has for years. We never knew where it came from. Your uncle never forgot his family, Eleanor said. Gently. He just couldn't come home to them. Roger Phillips found his voice. Mrs. Thorne, what you're describing is criminal conspiracy. Fraud on a massive scale. Why didn't you report this? Eleanor walked to her window again, gazing out at the gray November sea. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, steady as a heartbeat, faithful as tide, waves crashing against rocks below. Let me tell you about Miguel Santos, she said without turning around. Young man, barely 28. His wife was pregnant with their first child when the Miranda's dream supposedly sank. Miguel had gambling debts to some very dangerous people in Boston, the kind of debts that get your family hurt. She turned back to face them. Miguel's death cleared his debts and gave his family a chance. His wife collected insurance money, moved to California, raised their daughter in safety. That little girl is now Dr. Maria Santos Phillips, head of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. Roger Phillips dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, brown liquid spreading like spilled truth. That's "That's my wife," he whispered. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Your father-in-law ain't dead, Mr. Phillips. He's been watching over his family from a distance for 25 years. Those anonymous donations to your daughter's medical school, the mysterious scholarship fund that paid for her residency, that was Miguel Santos, a man the world thinks drowned in 1962. Silence broken only by wind and waves. So you tell me." "Gentlemen," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the authority of decades, "what's more important, the truth that destroys lives or the lie that saves them?" Eleanor led them up the winding staircase to the lighthouse's crown. The beacon room was a cathedral of glass and brass, the great lens casting its light across miles of dark water. Ship's lights twinkled on the horizon like fallen stars. "Every ship that passes tells a story," Eleanor said, adjusting the beam's direction with practiced settings. "Some stories are true. Some are necessary lies. My job ain't to judge. My job is to guide them all to safe harbor." Inspector Morrison held another photograph, this one showing his uncle with a woman and 3 children on a tropical beach, all of them smiling. "He remarried," Morrison said. Not a question, but a statement of wounded understanding. "Twice, actually," Eleanor confirmed. "Lost his second wife to cancer in 78. But those 3 children you see, they're your cousins. And they know nothing about Billy Morrison of Portland, Maine. To them, he's William Murray, retired merchant marine, grandfather of 7. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the water. Roger Phillips stared out at the dark ocean. "My wife, Maria. She still visits. Her father's Gravivery year. Brings flowers. Tells him about our children. And Miguel sits in the cemetery parking lot every year, watching," Eleanor said softly. "He's never missed a visit, never approached, but he's there." The lawyer, whose name Eleanor still couldn't remember, finally spoke. "Mrs. Thorne, this conspiracy involves dozens of people. Coast Guard officials, insurance investigators, maritime authorities. How did it operate for so long?" Eleanor's laugh was like wind through dried leaves. "Son, you're thinking too small. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was a lifeline. A handful of Coast Guard officers who believed sometimes a man deserves a second chance. Insurance investigators who knew when to look the other way. Port authorities who understood that official records don't always tell the whole truth." She gestured toward her logbooks, 43 years of meticulous records. "Every entry in those books represents a choice. A moment when someone decided that mercy mattered more than regulations. When compassion trumped procedure. Wind howling around the lighthouse. The Miranda's dream was just the first. Over the years, there were others. The Sarah's song, the North Wind, the beloved Mary. Ships carrying. Men who needed to disappear. Men running from debts, from danger, from lives that had gone wrong." Morrison looked up sharply. "The Sarah's song. That was 1974. Lost with all hands in Easter. Captain James Macready and his son Peter." Eleanor nodded. "Jimmy owed money to Theron people. Peter was facing assault charges after a bar fight went bad. Their deaths gave them both clean slates." She pulled out another folder, thick with documentation. "Jimmy's been running a charter fishing operation in the Bahamas for 13 years. Peter opened a boat repair shop in Key West, married a local. Girl, has 2 children. His assault victim? Recovered fully and collected a substantial settlement from the insurance company." Silence as the truth settles over them. "You see, gentlemen," Eleanor continued, "sometimes justice ain't about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people the chance to become who they're meant to be." Asterisk, the lawyer Eleanor decided to call him. Mr. Nervous pulled out a legal pad and began scribbling furiously. "Mrs. Thorne, you're describing a criminal enterprise that spans decades. Even if the motives were compassionate, This is fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Eleanor's storm-gray eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. And what would you have Meadow? Send 70-year-old men to prison? Destroy families built on hope? Tell a brilliant surgeon that her father's sacrifice was all for nothing? She moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick manila envelope. Let me tell you about the network, Mr. Nervous, because that's what it was, not a criminal conspiracy, but a network of people who understood that sometimes the law and justice don't align. The sound of photographs scattering across a table. Father, Miguel Rodriguez, chaplain at Portland Harbor. He provided false death certificates and held memorial services for men who weren't dead. Gave grieving families closure while protecting the departed. He's been running a homeless shelter in Miami for 15 years. She held up another photo. Dr. Sarah Chun, former Coast Guard medical examiner. She signed off on drowning deaths without bodies. Now she's running free clinics for undocumented immigrants in Texas. More photos, more stories. Captain Robert Stoney. Stone, Coast Guard cutter commander. He made sure search and rescue operations were thorough but ultimately unsuccessful when they needed to be. Retired with full honors, volunteers at a veterans hospital. Inspector Morrison's face was pale. These are good people. Respected professionals. The best people, Eleanor agreed. Folks who understood that sometimes you got to bend thurls to serve something higher than the law. She opened another folder, revealing financial documents. The insurance money went to families who needed it. But the dead men? They paid it back, every penny, through untraceable donations to charities, anonymous gifts to their families, contributions to community projects. The money always found its way home. Wind rattling the lighthouse windows Roger Phillips stared at. A bank statement. The new playground at Millhaven Elementary. Theninimus donor ... Miguel Santos, Eleanor confirmed. He's been watching his daughter's children play there through the fence for 3 years. Never approaches, never interferes. Just watches and smiles. Mr. Nervous looked up from his frantic note-taking. The statute of limitations on most of the sea crimes would have expired. But ongoing fraud, conspiracy. Shut up, Inspector Morrison said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. Just shut up, Morrison repeated, his voice thick with emotion. My uncle sent money to his family for 25 years. My mother got her cancer treatments paid for by a man the world thought was dead. My children have a college fund started by their dead great-uncle. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ship's lights on the dark water. So tell me, Counselor, what crime was committed here? Love? Sacrifice? Making sure families didn't suffer for one man's mistakes. The beacon sweeps across the water. Steady and sure, Eleanor's voice carried a note of pride. Your uncle may have left Portland under a cloud, Inspector. But William Murray has been a model citizen of Grand Cayman for 25 years. Owns a successful boat repair business, employs 30 locals, serves on the town council. She handed him a recent photograph, an older man cutting a ribbon at what appeared to be Askell dedication. The William Murray Elementary School, Eleanor explained. He built it with his own money. Educates over 200 children who wouldn't otherwise have access to quality schooling. Morrison's hands shook as he studied the photograph. The man in the picture was clearly his uncle, aged but unmistakable, surrounded by smiling children and grateful parents. He named it after himself, Morrison whispered. He named it after the man he became, Eleanor corrected. Billy Morrison was running from his mistakes. William Murray built something beautiful from his second chance. The November storm that had been threatening all evening finally arrived in earnest. Rain lashed the lighthouse windows and wind howled around the tower like voices of the lost. Viewed inside the beacon room, 4 people sat surrounded by the truth. That had been hidden for 43 years. Mr. Nervous closed his legal pad with a snap. Mrs. Thorne, regardless of the humanitarianisms of this situation, I have a legal obligation to report potential criminal activity. Eleanor's weathered hand stilled on the lighthouse controls. And what exactly would you report, counselor? That some grieving families received insurance money they were legally entitled to? That voluntary donations were made to worthy causes? That missing persons chose not to be found? Rain drumming harder against the windows. You could tear it all apart. She continued, her voice carrying the weariness of decades. Destroy Dr. Maria Phillips' career with the revelation that her father isn't dead. Ruin Inspector Morrison's uncles. Life in Grand Cayman. Send elderly men to prison for the crime of starting over. She turned to face them, backlit by the great beacon. But ask yourself this: what would be served by such destruction? What great principle of justice would be upheld? By turning mercy into crime? Roger Phillips had been quiet for a long time, staring at photograph after photograph of his father-in-law living a life of quiet service thousands of miles away. Finally, he spoke. My wife dreams about her father sometimes. She tells me there, good dreams, he's proud of her, tells her she's become everything he hoped she'd be. She wakes up smiling. Lightning illuminates the room briefly. If she knew he was alive, if she knew he chose to leave rather than face his problems, ... Philip's voice broke. It would destroy her. Not because he's alive, but because he never came back for her. Eleanor nodded slowly. Miguel Santos made a choice, Mr. Phillips. A hard choice. He could face his debts and risk his family's safety, or he could disappear and give them a chance at a better life. He chose his daughter's future over his own happiness. Inspector Morrison was studying the logbooks, reading entry after entry in Eleanor's careful handwriting. How many, Mrs. Thorne? How many men received this ... second chance? Eleanor walked to the beacon controls and began the evening's ritual of adjusting the light's arc. 17 ships, 63 souls. Some running from debts, some from violence, some from mistakes that couldn't be undone by staying. The beacon sweeps across the stormy sea, 63 men who died to the world but lived for their families. 63 men who send money home, watched their children grow from a distance, and built new lives based on service rather than selfishness. She pointed out the window toward the storm-tossed harbor, and every one of them earned their second chance. Dr. Rodriguez's shelter has housed over 3,000 homeless souls. Dr. Chun's clinics have treated 15,000 patients who couldn't afford medical care. Captain Stone's volunteer work has helped over 500 veterans readjust to civilian life. Thunder rolling across the water. Your uncle's school has educated a generation of children who might never have learned to read. Miguel Santos Anonymous. Donations have funded countless surgeries, scholarships, and community projects. Eleanor's voice rose above the storm. So tell me, gentlemen, what's the greater crime? Giving desperate men a chance to become better than they were? Or destroying the good they've built because it began with a lie? Mr. Nervous looked up from his legal pad, his face troubled. Mrs. Thorne, I understand the moral complexity here, but I have professional obligations. He was interrupted by the sharp blare of a ship's horn, loud and urgent in the stormy night. Eleanor's head snapped up, her lighthouse keeper instincts immediately alert. That's a distress signal. She rushed to the beacon controls, swinging the great light toward the sound. In the storm-whipped darkness, they could see the lights of a small fishing vessel, listing badly and heading straight for the rocks. Rain lashing the windows, wind howling. Radios. Out, Eleanor muttered, checking her equipment. Storms knock out communications. She looked at the men around her. That boat's got maybe 10 minutes before she breaks up on the reef. Without hesitation, Eleanor began working the lighthouse beam, sending the traditional Meridimedistris response. 3 long sweeps, 3 short, 3 long. The universal signal for message received. Inspector Morrison moved to the window. Can you guide them to safety? Eleanor's hands flew over the controls, years of experience guiding her movements. Maybe, if they trust the light, if they follow where I lead them. The beacon cuts through the storm like a sword of light. This is what it's all about, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. Not their chords, not the secrets, not the lives that were saved by disappearing. This moment, the choice. Do you trust the light? The fishing vessel's lights wavered as it fought the storm, then slowly began to follow Eleanor Speakin away from the deadly rocks. Come on, Eleanor whispered. Trust the light. Trust that someone's watching. Trust that you're in it alone in the storm. For 20 agonizing minutes, Eleanor guided the unknown vessel through treacherous waters, her beacon cutting through rain and darkness, like hope made visible. Finally, the ship's lights dissipated around the point, heading for the safety of the inner harbor. The storm begins to abate. Rain softening Eleanor released the breath she'd been holding and slumped against the beacon housing. Whoever they are, they'll see tomorrow. Inspector Morrison stared out at the calming sea. You saved their lives. Eleanor shook her head. I just kept the light burning. They saved themselves by choosing to follow it. She turned to face the 3 men, her storm gray, eyes reflecting the beacon's glow. That's all I've ever done, gentlemen. Kept the light burning. Whether it was guiding ships to safety or keeping secrets that protected families, my job has always been the same, to be a beacon in the darkness. The lighthouse beam continues its eternal sweep. Every ship that passed this point had a choice follow. The light or trust the storm. Every man who faked his death made the same choice. Follow the light of a second chance, or drown in the storm of their mistakes. Mr. Nervous closed his legal pad for the final time. Mrs. Thorne, I came here tonight to serve legal papers. But I think some truths are too important to be constrained by law. He walked to the great lens and stared out at the clearing sky. I have a daughter. If she were ever in trouble, if she needed someone to keep a light burning for her when the world turned dark ... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Asterisk. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright. Eleanor stood on the lighthouse gallery, watching the sunrise paint the ocean gold. The 4 men who had cleaned her tower the night before sat around her kitchen table, sharing coffee and silence. Inspector Morrison held a photograph of his uncle cutting the ribbon at the William Murray Elementary School. His official Coast Guard cap sat on the table beside him, badge gleaming in the morning light. I have a report to file, he said finally. The others looked at him with varying degrees of concern. Doc Morrison picked up his pen and began to write. Inspection of Beacon Point Lighthouse Facility completed November 16, 1987. Equipment found to be in excellent condition. Keeper Eleanor Thorne demonstrates exceptional competence and dedication. Pen scratching on official paper recommendation. Beacon Point Light, stationed to remain under manual operation. Indefinitely. Automated systems insufficient for local maritime conditions. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne confirmed as permanent keeper. He signed the report with a flourish and looked up at the others. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Roger Phillips pulled out his own paperwork, the town selectman's authorization for the lighthouse closure. Without ceremony, he tore it in half. Beacon Point Light is officially designated as a historic landmark, he announced, protected in perpetuity for its cultural significance to maritime safety. Mr. Nervous, whose name Eleanor finally learned, was David Hartwell, gathered his legal documents and stuffed them back into his briefcase. Sometimes, he said with a slight smile, The most important legal precedent is knowing when to create one. Seabirds calling, waves gently lapping the shore. Eleanor poured more coffee and settled into her rocking chair. So what happens now, gentlemen? Now, Inspector Morrison said, you continue doing what you've always done. You keep the light burning. He stood and shook Eleanor's weathered hand. But if you don't mind, I'd like to visit sometimes. Maybe bring my children. I think they should know that their great-uncle built a school for children who needed one. Roger. Phillips nodded. Maria has always wanted to visit the place where her father's boat was last seen. Maybe it's time she came home. Eleanor's eyes brightened. Miguel would like that. He comes by sometimes, you know. Sits on the rocks down there and watches the light. Never comes up, never says anything. But he's there. Maybe next time you could invite him up for coffee, Philip suggested gently. Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features. Maybe I will. Maybe it's time some secrets came home to roost. The lighthouse beam continues its sweep. Even in daylight, David Hartwell packed the last of his papers. Mrs. Thorne, in all my years of law practice, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. And what situation is that, Mr. Hartwell? Where doing the right thing required pretending the truth never existed. Eleanor's rocking chair creaked as she considered his words. Truth's a funny thing. Counselor. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is keep a secret. Sometimes the greatest truth is knowing when mercy matters more than facts. Footsteps on the lighthouse stairs as the three officials prepared to leave. Eleanor led them down from the beacon room one final time. In the morning light, the lighthouse seemed less fortress and more sanctuary, a place where lost souls could find direction. Will you keep the records? Inspector Morrison asked, gesturing toward the wooden chest and its 4 decades of secrets. Eleanor considered the question carefully. I'll keep what needs keeping. Some stories deserve to be remembered, even if they can't be told. They reached the bottom of the lighthouse, where morning sunlight streamed through the windows and painted everything gold. Eleanor opened her logbook to a fresh page and began her daily. Entry November 16, 1987. Clear skies following storm. Guided fishing vessel to safety. 0347 hours. Vessel identity unknown. All souls safe. She paused, then added, some lights are worth keeping burning. A sound of car doors. Engines starting as the 3 men drove away. Eleanor climbed the stairs one more time. In the beacon room, she made a small adjustment to the lighthouse timer. Instead of shutting off at dawn, the light will burn continuously now, a beacon visible even in daylight. A reminder that guidance is needed in bright times as well as dark. She pulled out her radio and tuned to the emergency frequency. Coast Guard Station Portland, this is Beacon Point Light. Beacon Point, this is Portland. Good to hear from you, Mrs. Thorne. We heard you had visitor siesta. Eleanor smiled. Indeed I did. 3 good men who reminded me why I keep this light burning. Copy that, Beacon Point. How's the beacon's status? Eleanor looked out at the morning sea, where fishing boats were heading out for the day's working. Cargo ships moved steadily along the shipping lanes. Somewhere out there, men who hadn't been declared dead were living lives of purpose and service. Somewhere, families built on love rather than truth were thriving. Portland, this is Beacon Point. Light is operational and will remain so. All mariners can navigate with confidence. Beacon Point will continue to guide all vessels to safe harbor. Understood, Beacon Point. Fair winds and following seas. Eleanor clicked off the radio and settled into her chair beside the great lens. She had work to do, records to maintain, weather to monitor, ships to watch over. But first, she had a letter to write. A letter to Miguel Santos, inviting him up from the rocks for coffee and conversation. A letter to William Murray in Grand Cayman. letting him know his family was proud of the school he'd built. Letters to all the dead men who had found new life in service to others. The lighthouse beam sweeps across calm waters. The light would keep burning. The secrets would remain safe. And Eleanor Thorne would continue her vigil, keeper of more than just a lighthouse, keeper of hope, guardian of second chances, and protector of the truth that sometimes mercy matters more than justice. Spring came early to Beacon Point that year. Eleanor tended a small garden beside Thelia's tomatoes and herbs, flowers that could withstand the salt air. She was pruning roses when the rental car pulled up the gravel drive. The woman who emerged was in her early 40s, with dark hair and kind eyes that carried echoes of someone Eleanor had known long ago. She moved with the confident grace of Simeon, accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. Mrs. Thorne? I'm Dr. Maria Santos Phillips. Eleanor set down her pruning shears and wiped her hands on her apron. I've been expecting you, child. Footsteps on gravel. Seabirds calling overhead. Maria looked up at the lighthouse, its white tower gleaming in the afternoon sun. This is Werrimy. Father's boat was last seen. Yes, Eleanor said simply. Would you like to see the view from the top? They climbed the circular stairway in comfortable silence. In the beacon room, Maria stood at great lens and looked out over the waters. That had supposedly claimed her father's life 25 years ago. The Coast Guard records say the Miranda's dream was lost somewhere out there, Maria said, pointing toward the horizon. 4 souls, including my father Miguel Santos. Eleanor nodded, watching the younger woman carefully. That's what the records say. Wind through the lighthouse windows. Maria turned from the window and fixed Eleanor with a direct gaze. My husband says you knew me, Father, that you have. Stories about the men who were lost. I have many stories, child. Some of them are even true. Maria smiled at that, expression so like her father's that Eleanor's breath caught. Mrs. Thorne, I'm a surgeon. I make my living cutting through flesh to find the truth underneath. And he spent my career learning when to cut and when to leave well enough alone. She walked to Eleanor's logbooks, rows of them spanning decades. May I? Eleanor nodded. Maria opened the log from October 1962 and found the entry for October 12th. 0347 hours. Fishing vessel Miranda's Dream past Beacon outbound. Storm approaching from northeast. 623 hours. Same vessel returned, riding low, proceeding to deep water. Captain appeared to signal all clear. No distress evident? Maria read the entry twice before speaking. He made it past the storm. According to my records, yes. Silence. Except for wind and waves. Mrs. Thorne, 3 weeks ago, I received an anonymous donation to my hospital's pediatric wing. $1 million, designated specifically for surgical equipment. The donor was listed as the Santos Family Foundation. Eleanor kept her expression neutral. That's generous. Maria opened her purse and withdrew a photograph, a recent picture of her 3 children playing in a hospital playground. This picture was included with the donation. My children haven't ever been photographed at the hospital. The photographer would have had to be watching from the parking lot, understanding passing between them like a current, someone who knows my children by sight. Mrs. Thorne, someone who's been watching from a distance. Someone who knew exactly what medical equipment our surgical unit needed most. Eleanor walked to her filing cabinet and withdrew the manila envelope she'd been keeping for 6 months. Your father asked me to give you this if you ever came looking for answers. Maria's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside was a letter written in Spanish, an Asmal wooden carving, a lighthouse, perfectly detailed. Paper rustling as Maria reads the letter was brief. Mia, if you are reading this, then you have found the woman who kept my secret all these years. I chose to leave not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to let any mistakes destroy your future. Every scholarship, every medical bill paid, every door that opened it for you. That was my love reaching across the water. You became the surgeon I always knew you could be. You saved lives because I chose to disappear from one. The lighthouse Mrs. Thorne carved represents the light that guided me to this choice. Keep it close and know that a father's love never dies. It just finds new ways to shine. Con amor eterno, Papa. Maria's tears fell on the wooden lighthouse, and Eleanor's weathered hand found her shoulder. He's been watching your career, child. Every award, every promotion, every life you've saved. He keeps newspaper clippings just like I keep ship records. The beacon sweeps across calm afternoon waters. Does he want to see me? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. What he wants and what he thinks is best for you are two different things, child. Miguel Santos has been punishing himself for 25 years, convinced that the danger he ran from might somehow follow him back to you. Maria wiped her eyes and looked out at the ocean. What danger? What was he so afraid of? Eleanor opened another folder, this one containing police reports and court documents. Your father owed money to Vincent Torino's organization. Not just gambling debts, he'd borrow wet against his boat to pay for your mother's cancer treatments. When she passed, and the bills kept coming ... Wind carrying the scent of salt and possibility, Torino gave him a choice. Work off the debt running drugs up the coast, or watch his familicifer the consequences. Miguel chose a third option. He chose to vanish. Maria studied the documents, her surgeon's mind processing the implications. Torino's organization was dismantled by the FBI in 1978. The threat's been gone for almost 10 years. Yes, Eleanor said quietly, but guilt has a longer memory than danger. Your father convinced himself that he was protecting you by staying away, that the man he'd become wasn't worthy of the daughter he'd raised. Seabirds calling, the sound of healing Maria folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her jacket. Pocket. Mrs. Thorne, could you get a message to my father? I could. Tell him that Dr. Maria Santos Phillips has 3 children who've never met their grandfather. Tell him that every life I save, I dedicate to the man who taught me that sometimes love means making impossible choices. Eleanor smiled. And tell him that his daughter cordially invites Miguel Santos to dinner next Sunday. I'll be cooking his mother's recipe for arroz con palo, the one he taught me when I was 7. Lighthouse beams sweeping across waters that hold no more secrets. I'll pass along the message, child, though I suspect he already knows you're here. Eleanor pointed down to the rocky shore below the lighthouse. A figure sat on the familiar boulder, too distant to make out clearly, but somehow achingly familiar. He's been there since dawn, Eleanor said softly, waiting to see if his little girl would climb the lighthouse that's been watching over both of you all these years. Maria pressed her face to the window, straining to see the figure below. How long has he been coming here? Every year on the anniversary of the Miranda's dream's supposed sinking. Every year on your birthday. Every year on the day your mother died. Sometimes just when the moon is full and themeries get too heavy. The sound of understanding, deep and wordless. He watched you graduate medical school through binoculars from that very rock. Saw you get married from the shore when you had your ceremony at the Millhaven Lighthouse Pavilion. He knows the names of your children, knows your husband's laugh, knows the way you hum when you're concentrating, just like you did as a little girl. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. He's been here all along. Love doesn't recognize borders, child, or death certificates. Eleanor's lighthouse had never hosted a dinner party before, but that Sunday evening, the keeper's quarters buzzed with unprecedented life. Dr. Maria Santos Phillips had arrived early with her family husband Roger, and 3 children who chattered. With the fearless curiosity of youth, the eldest, a boy of 12 named Miguel, after the grandfather he'd never met, peppered Eleanor with questions about lighthouse operation. The middle child, a girl of 10 called Elena, sketched the beacon room with artistic precision. The youngest, 6-year-old David, had appointed himself Eleanor's official assistant, seriously helping her set the table. Children's laughter, the clink of dishes being arranged. Mrs. Thorne. Maria called from the small kitchen where she was preparing her grandmother's arroz, con palo. He's still down there on the rocks. Eleanor peered out the window. Miguel Santos sat in his familiar spot, close enough to smell the cooking, but too far away to be anything more than a shadow of regret. 43 years I've been waiting for this moment, Eleanor murmured. Man's got to choose his own time to come home. Rice sizzling, garlic and sofrito, filling the air. Young Miguel tugged on Eleanor's skirt. Grandma Eleanor, Mama says there's a man outside who might be our grandfather. Why doesn't he come in? Eleanor knelt. To the boy's level, her storm-gray eyes gentle. Sometimes, child, grown-ups get scared. Even grandfathers. Sometimes they need to know they're welcome before they can find the courage to knock on the door. The boy considered this with the serious concentration only children can muster. Should I gobble him dinner's ready? Before Eleanor could answer, young Elena looked up from her sketch. I drew the lighthouse with a light in every window, she announced, so people know they're welcome. Eleanor looked at the drawing, a child's rendering of the lighthouse, but somehow capturing something profound. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, and tiny figures could be seen gathered around a table in the keeper's quarters. That's beautiful, Elena. What's the title of your picture? Home is where the light is, Elena said matter-of-factly, as if the answer was obvious. A moment of profound silence. Eleanor walked to the lighthouse controls and began illuminating every light in the tower, not just the great beacon, but every window, every lamp, every bulb. The lighthouse blazed like aster fallen to earth. There, she said with satisfaction. Now he'll know. Footsteps on gravel, slow and uncertain. They all heard it, tentative steps approaching the lighthouse door. Maria's hands stilled over Thuris. The children gathered around the window. Eleanor smoothed her apron and walked to the door. 3 gentle knocks. Eleanor opened the door to reveal a man in his 60s, weathered by sun and salt, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the coastal meadow. His eyes were Maria's eyes, kind and intelligent, but shadowed by decades of self-imposed exile. Eleanor, he said softly, thank you for keeping the light burning. Miguel Santos, Eleanor replied with a smile. You're just in time for dinner. The sound of a family reunion, tentative at first, then overwhelming. Maria appeared in the doorway, 25 years of grief and questions written on her face. Father and daughter looked at each other across a quarter-century of separation. Papa? Maria's voice was 7 years old again. Mia, Miguel whispered, and the word contained every letter he'd never sent, every birthday he'd missed, every moment of love he'd carried in silence. They embraced in Eleanor's doorway while 3 generations watched children meeting their grandfather for the first time. A husband witnessing his wife's wounded heart finally beginning to heal, and an old lighthouse keeper seeing the most important navigation of her career reach safe harbor. Tears and laughter, mixing like rain and sunshine. The dinner table in Eleanor's kitchen had never hosted 8 people before, but somehow Bavarian fit. Miguel sat between his grandsons, answering their endless questions about boats and islands, and the difference between storm clouds and fair weather ones. Abuelo, young Elena asked, why did you live so far away? Miguel's weathered hands stilled. On his fork, he looked across the table at Maria, seeking permission to answer truthfully. Sometimes, Nita, grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. And sometimes the only way to fix those mistakes is to go away for a while, to become better people, so we can come back and Beatty grandfathers our families deserve. The clink of silverware, gentle understanding Eleanor served generous portions. Of Maria's Arroz con Palo, the recipe that had traveled from Cuba to Maine to the Cayman Islands and back again. "Miguel," she said, "tell them about the school." And so Miguel told his family about the William Murray Elementary School, about the children who learned to read because their grandfather had learned to be a better man. He told them about the fishing, business that employed 30 local families, about the community center that hosted weddings and celebrations and town meetings. "I named the school after the person I became," Miguel explained to his granddaughter. "But he built it for the family I never stopped loving." Children's voices, bright with curiosity. "Can we visit your school, Abuelo?" Young David asked. Miguel's eyes filled with tears. "Would you like to?" "Yes." All 3 children CHORUSED. Roger. Phillips, the selectman who had once come to close the lighthouse, raised his coffee cup. "To second chances," he said. "To the lights that guide us home," Maria added. Eleanor lifted her own cup, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades. Oath-kept secrets and protected hopes. To the truth that sets us free, even when we have to wait 25 years to tell it. The lighthouse beam sweeps past the window, blessing the gathering as the evening wore on. Miguel pulled out photographs of his life in Grand Cayman pictures. Off school, his fishing boats, the community center. But also more personal photos. Mariah's graduation ceremony, taken from the back of the auditorium with a telephoto lens. Her wedding, captured from across the harbor. The children's school. Plays, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, all documented by a father who had loved from a distance. "I was there for everything," Miguel said quietly. "I couldn't be part of your life, Mia, but I was always watching. Always proud." Understanding flowing like tide, Maria reached across the table and took her father's hands. "I know, Papa. The anonymous donations. To the hospital, the scholarship fund that paid for my medical school, the mysterious benefactor who funded my research fellowship I always suspected." She smiled through her tears. Surgeons are trained to recognize patterns, to see connections others miss. The timing was too perfect, the amounts too specific. Someone who knew exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. Miguel's voice broke. "I wanted to give you everything, but all I could give you was distance." "You gave me more than that," Maria replied firmly. "You gave me the strength to stand on my own. You gave me independence, resilience, the knowledge that I could succeed without relying on anyone else. Those are gifts, Papa." Wind through lighthouse windows, carrying the sound of healing. Eleanor rose from the table and walked to her radio. "Coast Guard Station, Portland. This is Beacon Point Light." "Evening, Mrs. Thorne. What can we do for you?" Eleanor smiled at the family gathered around her table. "Portland, I need you to update your accords. Miguel Santos, previously listed as lost at sea October 12, 1962, is to be reclassified as found. Static pause on the radio. Copy that, Beacon Point, Santos, Miguel. Status change from lost to found. Any additional information for the record?" Eleanor looked at Miguel, who nodded with tears in his eyes. "Portland, this is Beacon Point. Record should reflect that Mr. Santos was never lost. He was just navigating by a different kind of light." The reunion at Beacon Point had created ripples across the network of secrets Eleanor had guarded for so long. Word traveled through channels that didn't officially exist. Carried by men who had spent decades living borrowed time. Inspector Morrison arrived on a Thursday with a guest, an older man with sun-weathered skin and his nephew's same steady blue eyes. William Murray had flown in from Grand Cayman to meet the family he'd protected through anonymous kindness for 25 years. Footsteps on lighthouse stairs, carrying decades of anticipation. "Eleanor," William said, his voice thick with emotion as he reached the beacon room. "Yao Botiful," stubborn keeper of impossible secrets. Eleanor embraced her old friend. Billy Morrison, you look good, child. Island life agrees with you. William Murray, he corrected gently. Billy Morrison was a man running from his mistakes. William Murray is someone who learned to live with purpose. Inspector Morrison stood awkwardly beside them, still processing the miracle of his uncle's return. Uncle Billy, William, I don't know what to say. William turned to his nephew with eyes full of regret and hope. Marcus, I know this is complicated. I made choices that hurt people. Your father spent years believing I was dead. Your mother grieved for a brother-in-law who was living freely while she struggled. Wind through the beacon room, carrying truth. But I need you to know, every month for 25 years, I sent money through the Maritime Relief Fund, not just for your mother's medical bills, but for your education, for the down payment on your house, for your children's college funds. I couldn't be Uncle Billy anymore, but William Murray could take care of Billy's family. Marcus sat heavily in Eleanor's rocking chair, the foundation that funded my criminology degree, the anonymous donor who paid for Dad's cancer treatments. William Murray believed in education, his uncle said simply, and he believed that good men like your father deserved to die with dignity, surrounded by family instead of crushed by medical debt. Understanding flowing between generations, Eleanor pulled out another set of photographs, recent ones showing William cutting ribbons, teaching children to read, standing with local officials at various ceremony and celebrations. Your uncle didn't just build a school, Marcus. He built a community. The William Murray Trust has funded clean water projects, medical clinics, hurricane relief efforts throughout the Caribbean. She handed Marcus a thick folder. Every penny of insurance money was paid back through charitable donations. Every family that lost a provider has been secretly supported for decades. The network didn't just help men disappear, it helped them become forces for good in the world. Seabirds calling, the sound of circles completing. William walked to the lighthouse lens and stared out at the water. I've lived with the weight of me choice every day for 25 years. But seeing what Miguel accomplished, what the others built with their second chances, I believe we created something beautiful from our broken places. Marcus joined his uncle at the window. Tell me about the others, the rest of the network. Eleanor smiled and began pulling out more files. Dr. James Macready, remember him from Sarah's song? He's been running a free medical clinic in Costa Rica for 15 years. Hisson Peter opened a boat repair shop that exclusively services vessels belonging to fishermen who can't afford commercial rates. Papers rustling, stories unfolding. Captain Thomas, Reed from the Miranda's Dream, established a sanctuary for retired merchant marines in the Philippines. Samuel Morrison, Billy's cousin from the North Wind, has been running a literacy program for adults in Honduras. She pulled out a map dotted with pins in red, blue, and gold. 17 ships, 63 men, and every single one of them used their second chance to serve something greater than themselves. Lighthouse beams sweeping across waters that no longer hold secrets. The network grew organically, Eleanor continued. Men helping other men who needed Tata Sapir, creating legitimate businesses, charitable foundations, educational institutions. They built an economy of redemption. William nodded. We stayed in contact, loosely. Christmas cards from fictional. Addresses, coded messages about family milestones. We created new identities, but never forgot our old responsibilities. Marcus studied the map, seeing the global scope of what his uncle and the others had accomplished. This isn't a criminal conspiracy. It's a relief organization. A way for desperate men to escape their circumstances and rebuild their lives constructively. More than that, Eleanor said. It's proof that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define destiny. That sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is disappear completely and let your actions speak for the man you've become. Afternoon light streaming through lighthouse windows, William put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Marcus, I need you to know, I never intended to create a network. I just wanted to escape my debts and keep your family safe. But when I reached Grand Cayman and started over, I realized I had an opportunity to do more than just serve it. He gestured toward the photographs spread across Eleanor's table. Every man who followed the same path faced the same choice. Use your second chance for selfish purposes, or build something that justifies the pain your disappearance caused. Wind through the lighthouse, carrying wisdom, every one of us chose to build. Because we learned that redemption isn't about escaping your past. It's about creating a future worthy of the sacrifice others made for your freedom. Marcus looked at his uncle really looked at him for the first time. The face was older, marked by tropical sun and decades of service, but the eyes held a peace that Billy Morrison had never possessed. I'd like to visit your school, Marcus said quietly. I'd like to meet the children who know you asked their founder. William's smile could have powered the lighthouse beacon. They'd love to meet their teacher's nephew from America, especially the ones who want to be police officers when they grow up. Eleanor began gathering the photographs and documents, preparing to return them to their protective folders. The light brought you all home, she said with satisfaction. Different routes, different timing, but the same destination. The eternal rhythm of waves against stone. Now comes the easy part, she continued with a chuckle. Learning to live with the truth instead of protecting it. Eleanor's lighthouse had been transformed for the holidays. Strings of lights wound around Thetor's exterior, and the beacon room itself had been decorated with a Christmas tree that could be seen from miles out at sea, a beacon of celebration. Rather than warning, the keeper's quarters buzzed with activity as three families prepared for their first Christmas stagger in decades. Miguel Santos stirred his famous Café Cubano, while his daughter Mary arranged presents around Eleanor's small tree. The Santos Phillips children ran between the lighthouse levels with the easy familiarity of kids who'd claimed the tower as their personal playground. Coffee percolating, children's feet on lighthouse stairs. William Murray had arrived that morning with Inspector Morrison's family, Marcus, his wife Jennifer, and their two teenagers who were still processing the reality of their supposedly dead great-uncle's return. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The Morrison men all shared the same steady blue eyes and stubborn jaw. Eleanor, William said as he hung stockings along the lighthouse's circular stairwell, this place has more Christmas spirit than my entire community center back home. Eleanor adjusted the beacon controls, maintaining the light sweep even during the celebration. Lights gotta keep burning, William. Christmas don't stop storms from coming. Wind through the tower, carrying joy instead of secrets d'ar. Sarah Chun had driven up from Texas with Father Miguel Rodriguez, both of them looking older, but somehow lighter than in Eleanor's old photographs. The priest had brought his guitar and spent the afternoon teaching the children traditional Christmas carols in 3 languages. It's strange, Dr. Chon mused as she helped Eleanor prepare eggnog in the kitchen. For 15 years, I've been treating patients who didn't officially exist, undocumented immigrants, people without papers. Now I'm celebrating Christmas with people who officially died decades ago. Eleanor smiled. Different kind of invisibility, child, but the same need for compassion. Guitar music from the beacon room, voices joining in harmony. The most surprising arrival had been Captain Robert Stoney Stone, the former Coast Guard commander who had orchestrated many of the failed rescue operations. He'd driven down from the Veterans Hospital where he volunteered, bringing with him 3 elderly former servicemen who had nowhere else to spend Christmas. Eleanor Thorne, Stoney announced as he climbed the lighthouse stairs, you've created the most beautiful security breach in maritime history. Laughter echoing through the lighthouse, But the evening's real magic began when Maria Santos Phillips stood in the beacon room and raised her glass of Eleanor's homemade eggnog. "To the keeper of secrets," she began, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned in operating rooms, who taught us that sometimes the most important truth is knowing when to hold your tongue. Miguel raised his own glass. "To second chances that become first choices," William nodded. "To the light that guides us home, even when we don't know we're lost." Glasses clinking, voices joining in agreement, Eleanor looked around the beacon room, at the faces gathered in her lighthouse children who'd never known their grandfathers were alive. Men who'd spent decades believing they were protecting their families through absence. Wives and spouses learning to expand their understanding of love and sacrifice. "To the truth that sets us free," she said simply, "even when freedom looks different than we expected." Wind through the lighthouse, carrying blessings as the evening progressed. The children convinced their various grandfathers to share stories, not about the lives they'd left behind, but about the adventures they'd found in their new identities. William told them about teaching literacy classes in a language he'd had to learn himself. Miguel described the coral reefs around Grand Cayman and the sea turtles he helped protect. Father Rodriguez strummed his guitar and sang ballads about redemption, while Dr. Chen shared stories about the babies she delivered in makeshift clinics during natural disasters. Guitar music weaving through conversations. "You know what strikes me most about all this?" Jennifer Morrison said to Eleanor as they watched 3 generations of men playing cards at the kitchen table. They didn't just survive their disappearances. They thrived. They became better versions of themselves. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes you got to die to your old self before you can be born into who you're meant to be." These men didn't just escape their problems, they transformed it into their solutions. Children's laughter from the beacon room. Young Miguel Santos Phillips had appointed himself the evening's lighthouse operator, carefully adjusting the beacon under Eleanor's supervision. "Grandma Eleanor, will you teach me to be a lighthouse keeper like you?" Eleanor's weathered hands guided the boy's smaller ones on the controls. "Anyone can learn to operate a lighthouse, child, but being a keeper? That's about understanding what needs protecting and having the courage to protect it, no matter the cost." The beacon sweeps across dark water, dotted with Christmas lights from passing vessels. "What did you protect, Grandma Eleanor?" Eleanor looked around the room at the family she'd helped reunite, at the men who'd become forces for good because someone had given them the chance to disappear and rebuild. "Hope," she said simply. "I protected hope." Eleanor Thorne sat at her small desk in the lighthouse's base, composing what she knew would be her most important letter. Outside, the January sea moved with the restless energy of new beginnings, and ships passed with their lights bright against the clear winter sky. The letter was addressed to the superintendent of lighthouses, but Eleanor knew it would be read by historians, maritime officials, and perhaps someday by students learning about the intersection of duty and compassion. Pen scratching on paper, words choosing themselves asterisk, "To whom it may concern. After 43 years as keeper of Beacon Point Light, I find myself compelled to document the true nature of my service. This lighthouse has operated continuously since 1940, guiding vessels safely through treacherous waters and warning of dangerous reefs. But its most important function has been less visible and infinitely more complex. I have served not just as a keeper of light, but as a keeper of hope." Asterisk Eleanor paused in her writing, looking up at the beacon room where she could hear Miguel teaching his grandsons the proper way to clean lighthouse lenses. The sound of 3 generations working together filled the tower with warmth. Continuing to write asterisk over the past 4 decades, this station has provided sanctuary for 17 vessels and 63 souls who required alternative navigation assistance. These mariners faced circumstances that made traditional approaches to safe harbor impossible. Through careful coordination with compassionate officials and the establishment of what could only be called a network of mercy, these individuals were guided to new lives built on service rather than secrecy. The results speak for themselves. Educational institutions established, medical clinics founded, charitable organizations created, communities served. 63 men who might have been destroyed by their circumstances instead became forces for positive change in the world. Asterisk the scratch of pen on paper. Truth being recorded. Eleanor stood and walked to her window. In the harbor below, she could see Miguel teaching young David to identify different types of vessels by their silhouettes. Dr. Chun was examining a seagull's injured wing while the other children watched with fascination. William Murray was helping Father Rodriguez repair the lighthouse's storm shutters. The two men working with the camaraderie of old friends. She returned to her letter. Asterisk. I have violated no laws, though I have bent regulations in service of a higher purpose. Every insurance payment was legitimate, every death certificate accurate to the circumstances as they existed at the moment of signing. The fact that some deaths were symbolic rather than literal does not diminish their legal validity. More importantly, every man who received this assistance has more than justified the investment. They have built schools, clinics, and businesses. They have served their communities with distinction. They have raised families, both old and new, with love and dedication. Pausing to consider her next words carefully, the question facing maritime authorities is not whether my actions were legal, but whether they were right. I submit that a system of rigid bureaucracy that cannot accommodate Sepultian circumstances is a system that serves rules rather than people. The light at Beacon Point will continue to burn. The secrets it has guarded have become celebrations. The men it helped disappear have become pillars of their communities. And the families that grieve their loss have learned that love transcends even death, especially symbolic death. Asterisk. Eleanor signed the letter with a flourish and sealed it in an official envelope, but she wouldn't mail it. Not yet. First, she wanted to finish one more important task. Footsteps on stairs. Climbing toward truth in the beacon room, Eleanor opened a fresh logbook, the first new one in 10 years. On the first page, she wrote, January 1st, 1988, beginning new record keeping. Protocol. Previous entries documented ships guided to safety. Future entries will document souls guided home. Below that, her first entry, Beacon Point Light now serves as gathering place for the Santos Murray Morrison Philip Sexton family. 17 lost vessels have become 63 found souls. Network operations concluded successfully. All navigational objectives achieved. She paused, then added, light continues to burn. Hope continues to guide. Truth continues to heal. The lighthouse beam sweeps across waters that hold no more secrets.